Now we are going to look at taking that data we collected and making scatter plots, adding trend lines, and finding the equations of those trend lines. So here I've copied and pasted my data from the shared Google Doc into Excel, just because I think it's easier to work on this on my local computer rather than relying on an internet connection and sharing a document with a bunch of other people. Not absolutely required, just my preference. So in every single one of these, we're going to try to use one of these variables, bedrooms or bathrooms or square feet or lot size, to predict the selling price. That's our goal, to predict the selling price. So what I did is I just took these two, the square feet and the selling price, and I put them in this tab. And I kept the number just so I could, match them up easier, house 6 or whatever. And so to make a scatter plot, I just selected these, went to Insert, and selected the scatter from the drop-down, just like that. I made it over here. I added axis titles for price and house size in square feet. I didn't add the units for price because it's labeled here in dollars. And then here a nice title. So you can see this one outlier I described as bonkers in my data set was a totally normal size for our data set, but the selling price was way, way out of line with the others. So I talked to a friend of mine who actually works in real estate, and she was able to look up the listing, which I did not have access to. And this was actually 2 townhouses, each of which had separate living areas. So it's sort of like 4 residences. Anyway, it doesn't really fit with my data. So what I'm going to do is just delete it out of there. You can see it's a crazy outlier. You should definitely look into outliers. Don't just delete them without, doing some effort to look into them. In this class, obviously, if I didn't have a friend who worked in real estate, I'd probably still delete it because clearly something else was going on. That was not a normal house. So here's what my scatter plot looks like. And you can see there's the general upward trend. This house is pretty far down, actually. It's a fairly large house for a low selling price. We could look more into why that is. Maybe it was a real, let's say, fixer-upper or something like that. But it doesn't really matter for the sake of what we're doing today. You can add chart elements and then go to trend line. But instead of just clicking the box, do the arrow over here. That will bring up this side thing that's cut off a little bit, but you can see it says more options. And then it brings up this sidebar. Linear is what we want. If you scroll down, trendline name, we don't need to worry about. We don't need any of that. The only thing we want is display equation on chart. If you want to, you can also display R squared value on chart. That's something we talked about before, sort of. So let's leave it off for now and address that later. So now this is just a text box. I'm going to drag this somewhere better. I always like to make the size a little bigger because I think that is pretty tiny. 14 usually works pretty well. And then to stop this from being a see-through box, I usually go up here to Format, and in Shape Fill, I select white. And now, it reads very clearly on my graph. Now, this is a typical equation of a line like you've seen in algebra class. Y equals M. M is 87.934 in this case, times X plus B. That's not the way we're actually going to write these in statistics, but we'll get to that in the next video. For now, make scatter plots of all your different variables versus selling price in your data. So I did that here in this video. I did that beforehand for this one. Number of bedrooms versus selling price. You can see we have the same Y equals MX plus B equation, but with different numbers. Same thing with bathrooms versus selling price. And lot size versus price. A bit of a surprise here. You'd expect a larger lot for a house to cost more, but we actually got a downward trend, and we'll talk a little bit why that is in a future video too. So if you get all this done, get all your equations and trend lines on there, in the next video we'll talk about writing these equations the way we want to in stats, and then actually what do these numbers mean and putting those in sentences. I'll see you then.